All right, let's dive into a really fascinating story about performance, perception, and a pretty massive misunderstanding. It's the story of the hunger artist, a man whose whole performance was just not eating. But here's the thing, his real starvation had absolutely nothing to do with food. So, from the outside, his art seemed pretty simple, right? No food equals a ton of suffering. People would literally pay money to watch this guy push his body to the absolute limit. But the real tragedy of his story is that the suffering they were all witnessing, the very thing they paid to see, wasn't his real suffering at all. To really get this, we got to look at the performance itself. What did it actually look like? Well, it was a massive public spectacle, completely built around this idea of extreme self-denial. And this whole thing was super structured. First off, he's in a cage. Yeah, a cage, on display for everyone like an animal. Then you've got these guards watching him 24/7, supposedly to make sure he wasn't sneaking any food. And the biggest rule of all? A strict 40-day limit. His manager set that rule, and it basically defined the whole performance. Now, if you were in the audience, that 40-day mark was everything. That was the big climax. They really believed they were seeing the absolute peak of what a human being could possibly endure. It was like the finish line of this insane marathon of willpower, and they were there to see him just teetering on the edge of existence. And that really brings us to the audience's role in all this. Their relationship with the artist was, well, it was complicated, a little uncomfortable even. Because, let's be honest, it was all about the weird appeal of watching someone else suffer. The crowd's reaction was this strange mix of feelings. On one hand, they were just blown away by his stamina. But on the other, there was this kind of creepy fascination. People were just drawn to this really upsetting idea of watching a man starve himself. It was a show that was both thrilling and deeply unsettling at the same time. But here's the catch. Their interest had an expiration date. It was completely tied to that 40-day rule. As soon as the performance was over, poof, the public's attention just moved on. They weren't interested in his actual potential as an artist. They were just there for the drama contained within the rules of the show. Okay, so this is where the whole story just flips on its head. We've seen what the audience saw. Now, let's pull back the curtain and find out what was really going on inside that cage. So let me just ask you this. What if everyone had it all wrong? What if that physical suffering, the agony everyone thought he was in, was just a complete fiction? Well, the truth comes from the artist himself. He basically says, hey, fasting, for me, that's not some huge act of willpower. It's the easiest thing in the world. He says he has to fast because he could never find a food he actually liked. If he had, he would have just eaten like anyone else. So for him, it wasn't denial, it was a necessity. And that, right there, that is his real agony. It wasn't the empty stomach. It was this deep psychological pain you get when you pour your soul into your art and people just fundamentally don't get it. Imagine being praised for all the wrong reasons. That was his personal hell. So you end up with this huge, uncrossable gap between the artist and his audience. It's a disconnect that just gets reinforced every single time a performance ends. You see it most clearly when those 40 days are up. The audience, they feel great. They're satisfied. They think, wow, we saw him hit his limit. But the artist, he's completely dissatisfied. He knows that 40-day limit is just some random number. His real art, his ability to just keep going, was cut off. For them, it's the end of the show. For him, it's just an annoying interruption. So really, the artist is trapped by two different kinds of hunger, and they're all tangled up. There's the literal physical hunger for a food he says he could never find. But then there's this much deeper, more painful hunger, a hunger to be understood, for an audience that could see his art for what it really was. Not a struggle, but just his natural state. And because neither of those hungers ever gets fed, he's always, always dissatisfied. In the end, his story really turns into a kind of martyrdom, but he's not a martyr for some grand cause or belief. He's a martyr for his art, an art that literally no one else could understand. You see, what he wanted more than anything wasn't just permission to fast longer. His ultimate dream was for the audience to get it so completely that they would be the ones yelling, "Keep going, go past the 40 days." For him, that would have been true satisfaction. Their recognition that his potential was basically limitless. And that leads to his really haunting final question.
It just shows how completely baffled he was by it all. Why, he wonders, would people rather watch the performance of a struggle instead of appreciate the truth of his effortless talent? It's really just the cry of an artist who wanted, more than anything, for people to see him for who he really was.
And that kind of leaves us with a big question, one that goes way beyond this one story. When we experience art, any art, are we just there for our own satisfaction? Or are we actually trying to connect with and understand the artist? In that huge, sometimes lonely gap between the creator and the audience, whose satisfaction truly matters?